Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel Gridline Coaching Classes.
When you hop on a train, mail a letter, or just grab a soft drink, have you ever really stopped to think about who's behind it all? Who actually owns that business? Is it a person, the government, or some giant global company? Today, we're going to unpack all of that, the different ways businesses are run, and why it actually matters. A lot.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the basics, the main players in the business world. Then we'll dig into why governments ever got into business in the first place. After that, we'll look at the huge economic shifts that brought global players into the picture. And finally, we'll see how this whole puzzle fits together today.
So first things first, let's just set the stage a little. We live in what's called a mixed economy, and that just means ownership isn't an all-or-nothing thing. It's a blend, a mix of different types.
I mean, just think about it for a second. The corner store you go to, the courier service that drops off your packages, your bank, the power company, ownership is everywhere, but it's not always what you think. It takes on all sorts of different forms. Okay, so you can pretty much split the economy into two big camps. On one side, you've got the private sector. These are businesses owned by regular people, by individuals or groups. Think about your local shop, or even a big private company. Then on the other side, you have the public sector. These are the big ones owned and managed by the government, like the Indian Railways or the post office.
And this whole idea, this framework of a public-private divide, is really the foundation for how we understand the Indian economy. This is the basic map of the territory we're going to be exploring.
Right, so this brings up a huge question. Why did the government get into the business of, running businesses in the first place? And the answer really takes us back in time, to the needs of a brand new nation.
Think about it. After 1947, India had to build its economy almost from scratch. That meant gigantic investments in things like roads, power, and heavy industries like steel. Now, these projects needed an unbelievable amount of money and would take forever to pay off. The private sector at the time just couldn't or wouldn't take on that kind of risk, so the public sector had to step in. It was about building a nation and making sure economic power didn't just end up in a few hands.
Okay, so we know the why, but what about the how? How exactly does the government run a business? Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. There are actually three totally distinct ways they do it, and each one has its own rulebook.
First up, we have the departmental undertaking. This is the most traditional, the original model. The business is basically run as just another department of a government ministry. It's the most direct way to manage absolutely essential services. We're talking about the railways, the post and telegraph department. Their employees are government employees, and all their money comes right out of the government budget.
Now, the big plus here is that there's direct control and accountability to Parliament. But that exact same control is also its biggest weakness. It means things can be really inflexible, get tangled up in endless red tape, and you guessed it, political interference can grind decisions to a halt.
Next on the list is the statutory corporation. This is a totally different beast. It's a public company that's created by its own special law, a specific act of Parliament. It's like it gets its own custom-made rulebook that defines all of its powers and functions. The whole idea was to give it the power of the government, but the flexibility of a private company. On paper, this sounds amazing, right? You get operational flexibility, you're financially independent, but in the real world, government and political interference have a way of creeping back in, especially on the big decisions, so that freedom they were supposed to have can get a little bit limited.
And that brings us to our third type, the government company. Now, this is where things get really interesting. This is a company set up just like any other private company, but the government owns at least 51% of it. This whole structure was designed to let a public enterprise go head-to-head with the private sector, using the same corporate playbook. So these are pretty easy to set up, and they get a lot of freedom in their day-to-day decisions. But here's the catch. Because they're set up like a regular company, they aren't directly answerable to Parliament. And that can sometimes mean a lack of accountability, even though it's still public money at stake.
So for decades, this was the system. The public sector was the big engine of the Indian economy. But then came the 1990s, and bam, everything changed. It was a massive, dramatic economic shift.
To really wrap your head around just how huge this shift was, just look at this number. Back in 1956, a full 17 industries were reserved only for the public sector. The government had this massive, protected space all to itself across the economy. And now, look at this. That number has crashed from 17 all the way down to just 3: atomic energy, arms, and rail transport. In pretty much every other area, the doors were thrown wide open for private companies to come in and compete. So, what was the main tool that drove this incredible change? It all comes down to a policy called disinvestment, and it's pretty simple, really. It just means the government selling its shares in public companies to private buyers, or to you and me, the general public. The goal? Raise some money, and hopefully make those companies run better. Now, this new open-door economic policy didn't just make room for local private companies. It rolled out the welcome mat for a completely new kind of player on the field, the global enterprise.
We're talking about the big guys, the multinational corporations, or MNCs, and they are a whole different beast. We're talking huge amounts of cash, the latest technology, operations all over the planet, all run from a central headquarters somewhere. Think of the biggest names you know in tech, cars, or food. Those are the players, and their arrival totally changed the game.
One of the most common ways these global giants got into the market was through something called a joint venture. This is basically where two or more businesses team up, often a big global company and a local one. They pool all their resources and know-how to go after a specific goal, and they share the risks and, hopefully, the rewards.
So, after all these twists and turns, where are we today? Well, the Indian economy is now this really complex, bustling ecosystem where all three types of businesses, public, private, and global, are all living together, competing, and sometimes even cooperating. And I think this quote just nails the modern mindset. It's not really about public versus private anymore. The idea now is to see them as two sides of the same coin, as complementary parts of one national economy, where both have a role to play in driving growth.
And that leaves us with a big final question for the future, doesn't it? As our economy keeps changing, what is the right mix? How do we find that perfect balance between the public sector's mission to serve and the private sector's drive for profit? There's no easy answer, but finding it is going to define our economy for years to come.